Good morning, everyone. Hello, my name is Pete Kimball. I'm an associate partner with McKinsey and Company based at our Chicago office and one of the authors of our work on machine intelligence and manufacturing operation collaboration between McKinsey and Company and MIT. Joining me this morning are co-hosts Ingrid Milan and Bruce Lawler. Bruce is the managing director of MIT's Machine Intelligence in Manufacturing and Operations program. And Ingrid Milan is a partner out of our DC office and a leader in our manufacturing and supply chain practice. We're really excited today to share some of the findings from the research that all of you have been a part of, and then also go through the playbooks that we've generated as part of this effort to help you get started or advance your own journey on analytics and machine intelligence and operations. Without further ado, Ingrid's going to kick us off here to go through some of the findings, and Bruce will cover the playbooks themselves and what's next for the research and partnership here.
Thank you for that introduction, Pete. Very excited to be with you today, sharing a little bit of the excitement that Pete was saying, and I'm sure I'm speaking for Bruce as well. As Pete said, if we go to the next page on objectives, today what we want to do is share a little bit of what have we seen from the work that we've been doing, what are some of the things that leaders do well, and then how can you learn from this for your own personal journey, talk a little bit about some of the next steps, and then more importantly, also many of you already got some of your results and understand where you're at, so how can you use those implementation playbooks for your own benefit and kicking off your journey. So just talking a little bit about the effort itself. Over the last years, what we've been working on is understanding from different companies, and we can go into the next page to see it. We've surveyed over 100 companies in North America to understand what are companies doing, what are they not doing, and call out a little bit of what's hype versus reality. I think that we in this world are inundated with information about digitization, machine intelligence, and there's a lot of things that appear to be a hype, especially if you're not there. And so we really wanted to understand where are players at, and then what are some of those key areas of success that they've been seeing. We really looked into understanding the results. What are those enablers and how have they deployed? And really looking at governance, how they partner, what is their people, and data execution. And if I had to summarize in a phrase, I think that the future is bright. There's a lot of companies, and particularly the leaders, that have been seeing significant improvements in their KPIs, and we'll touch upon it in a moment. But when we talk KPIs, we're not talking operational efficiency only. It's like holistic improvements in their operations. And those leaders have seen almost 2 to 3 times what others have been seeing. And I think what the other interesting fact in that top line is not only have they been seeing those improvements, but they've continued to accelerate their investments in people, their investments in capital, to make sure that those results are sustained over time, or they continue to accelerate. So the bar will keep moving over time. If we go to the next page, what we'll see—
Ingrid, I just wanted to add one thing, because I think it's always helpful for people to have kind of some easy walking around numbers. Well, first of all, thank you all for completing the study and for joining us today. But the way I think of it, Ingrid gave you the exact numbers, but if you think about really they're getting double the improvement, and we don't have it on here, but you'll have in your playbooks, is the payback period. So their payback period is roughly half of what everyone else's, the bottom 2 quartiles of the leaders are roughly half the payback period, less than a year. And so an easy walking around number is to think that the leaders in this particular case are getting double the impact in half the time. So if you just need one thing to keep in mind, and as you go on this journey, that my goal is to really get double the impact in half the time. So thank you, Ingrid.
No, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. By the way, one of the things that I also wanted to call out in this page that I missed is We intend for these efforts to not be a one and done, and we'll talk about it along the way. As I was saying before, we do expect for the bar to continue to increase as people are continuing to invest and efforts are accelerated. So on top of thanking you for participating, as Bruce called it out, I also you'll hope that you'll continue to hear from us in the future and continue to participate in this efforts as you're embarking in your journey. Before we go into any of the efforts, I do want to talk about what machine intelligence is. And the reason for talking about it, if we go to the next page, is to really level set what we're saying. Sometimes when we talk about analytics and digitization and analytics, people have different understandings of where different areas are and can interpret it as what we have on the bottom, which is the lower level of maturity around dashboards, which are focused solely on reporting data that exists. But when we talk about machine intelligence, we're really talking about automation. We're talking about these computer models that not only get the data, but learn from the data and can adjust to help a particular goal that we're doing over time. So as we're talking about in this conference, we are really focusing on that top left part that you're seeing and how players are going through the journey to get there. So after level setting, what are the results? And I think everybody's wanting to hear a little bit more of that, or what can we learn from the leaders? Like if we can go to the next page, what we'll see is there are 5 things that we want to deep dive on this presentation that we can actually learn from that leading pack, which is out there. So 1, we've talked about it before, like just getting on the journey is important. Getting on the journey well, which we'll talk about in a second, is actually even more important, as there's a lot of impact to be had in there. We have seen certain priority use cases or categories that most of the leaders are following, talking about forecasting, transportation, and many others that seem to be the ones that have been having less of a hype and more of a reality in their ability to execute and drive results from. Building a partnership is critical. This is not a journey to embark alone within a company. This is a journey to embark with others. And this actually applies to anything that we talk when we talk digitization. Anything that we've seen on the leadership side of automation comes from working together with different partners in industry, academia, startups, government, and many other areas that actually can help enhance not only the internal capabilities, but also bringing tools that accelerate the process. People is critical, and we'll deep dive, but this is not only hiring people. The idea is not just go into the market, get a lot of data scientists and data engineers, bring them in. Building and training the front lines as well as the operations that exist today. And most importantly, the leadership is one of the biggest factors of success. And finally, just investing in data. When we talk data, it gets a little bit tricky because it's not just investing in bringing a lot of data without purpose. Data needs to have the right infrastructure. Data needs to have the right objectives as we're bringing it in order to be able to use it most effectively. We'll go into a couple of deep dives into these areas, and Bruce will help me along the way, also like shining some examples of what we've seen. But as I was saying, if we go into the next page, the KPIs that we've seen in terms of impact is quite holistic. I think normally when we think about use cases for bringing data and analytics into play, a lot of people tailor it, especially if you're an operations leader. A lot of people tailor it to the top left. Efficiency. How can I get more OEE out of my lines? How can I make sure that I reduce my dependence on labor, especially in the market that we're today? How can I make sure that I'm getting my costs down? And of course, all of those, as you can see, there's a significant difference from what the leaders have been able to achieve to the bottom 50% of companies in development in this area. That being said, one of the most interesting things for me was it's not just about your typical operational KPIs. And when you make it about a broader impact, it actually makes the use case not only more attractive to the business, but also more holistic, and you can get more speed from it. So you see a lot of impact that comes in revenue, which is not a typical KPI that would be assessed in terms of operational improvement, but also other things that are at the forefront of focus for companies, like environmental impact, efficiency, and satisfaction, which is a critical priority in many of the companies that we see in the market and serve today. If we go into the next page, we've seen the improvement, but this is not as I said, once and done. And like, it does require a process behind it. Many of the fail points that I think both MIT as leaders in operations, as ourselves seen, and especially on this research, is to just start to see what the shiny object is there. So seeing an interesting technology or an interesting level of automation going there from machine learning perspective, and then applying it without process around it. There is a commitment to not only having a process that you follow and having conviction behind this process, but also having continuous improvement and refinement of it. Like, what people can spend a lot of time, and companies can spend a lot of time planning for the perfect process. It is unlikely to come, and at the end of the day, you're probably going to spend 2-3 years planning for the perfect process. But getting into that type of agile mindset of setting a process, sticking to it, but also continuously improving and refining it over time is what makes the biggest difference overall.
Yeah, and let me give you an example here, coming from a large pharmaceutical company in Europe, a Bayer Pharmaceutical. So what they've done is they do have a defined governance process and governance organization that looks at what they believe are the most impactful use cases. So they look at a corporate-wide and decide what their biggest problems are. They have a centralized funding organization to fund projects like this. They also have a center of excellence to develop solutions, and they've chosen a single pilot factory where they implement these solutions. So they implement them in a pilot factory. They perfect them, they work out the issues of drift and the problems that you would have with a machine learning model, and then they deploy rapidly around the globe to all of their facilities. So that's a way that governance can really impact. And you find that in our study, they actually are what we call an executor. What that means is they've actually spent proportionally less on implementing enablers like training people and collecting data, and achieve more, great results because of this laser-like focus on what is my problem, how do I solve it, and then let me solve it, globally after I've perfected it. So I think that's a great example of where this kind of process can really drive outstanding performance.
And Bruce, I want to actually double down on one of the points that you were saying in your example, which is the importance of piloting and piloting fast. I think when we talk about the whole concept of getting on the flywheel and starting, to be interpreted as you now need to take a use case and immediately do a big bang approach of I'm going to deploy it everywhere at the same time and see how it works. There is a real importance of as part of that improvement process about doing the pilot quickly, and then building that pilot for scale, right? Not only for the thing that you're doing at the moment, but doing the pilot for scale. And it's much more effective if you do it that way, especially because you'll start to see results like earlier, and
Right.
that keeps the engagement in the organization.
And here's, I'll give you an example of one of their use cases is, they make, as you can imagine, lots of different pharmaceutical products. They have very tight regulatory environment where they need to be inspected. So they have people that are trained on specific products that they can inspect. They need specific types of equipment to do that inspection. And so one of their projects was really optimizing, matching to the output of the factory, then optimizing the scheduling of the people, the equipment, and then the product coming out of the factory. And as a result of that optimization, they were able to get a double-digit increase in revenue. So it actually drove increased revenue because they could increase the overall throughput of the factory, technically, in this case, reducing that as a bottleneck. So, because they looked at it holistically, they were able to determine that was a big problem for them globally, and it gave them a huge uptick in the key metric, in this case, revenue.
Yeah, completely agree. So a lot of lessons learned from cases like this and the holistic approach of it. And so, I mean, I think the natural question that comes to people's mind is, okay, examples like the ones that he used, Bruce, on like specific use cases. I think that there's a very big and broad set of things that you can do. There's always priorities. There's always opportunities. So it's been really interesting for us to see that a little bit of a convergence on the types of use cases that are currently being deployed. And so, like, if we go to the next page, what we're calling out here is what are some of the things that, or let's call it the most common visions or problems that companies are solving for. It was, at least to me, it was particularly interesting to see the 100% that you see in here, that every single leader has been focused on forecasting, transportation, and maintenance. I think this is due to two things. Like on one side, those are some of the things where technology is a little bit more developed and proven in order to get results from. It's also much more cross-functional in nature, especially as you're looking at forecasting, which puts it at the top of the agenda for the business. That being said, for me, the way to read this and like the importance of reading this, it's not that you should just focus on the top ones. It's much more around, we have seen stories of success and significant success amongst the use cases that have here, which means that there's a lot of impact to be had if you go in there. As you're thinking personally about next steps and ways to go, understanding these use cases is an element of the picture. I do have to say that the fact that you see multiple 100% means that they weren't done in isolation. As companies think about their strategy for machine intelligence and what they can do further, there is a benefit of bundling some of these areas and making sure that the strategy is cohesive for what you're trying to achieve in the future overall. And Bruce, I don't know if there's a couple of
examples. So I can give you a couple of great examples. And we think it's the reason to pick some of these more common use cases is there tends to be more infrastructure, if you will, out there. There's more companies that can help you solve these problems. And as we get a bit farther into the results of the study, we'll see that partnering is very important. So there's lots of people to partner with in these particular areas. But as far as examples go, in forecasting, one we can all relate to is staffing at call centers, right? We all hate to wait on a call center for an agent to pick up. So Wayfair prides themselves on you being able to call them, and they also know demographically who's likely to call based on the product that has been shipped. So they're actually able to forecast demand, and before they used demand at their call center based on the products that ship. And so before they used machine learning, they had about a 15% miss in staffing, right? How many people they should have in the call center. After they used machine learning to look at demand and match demand to demographic and their propensity to call the call center, they got that miss down to 4%. So now what they're able to do is they can answer 20% more calls because they have people there at the right time of day. And so it reduces variability, wait times are down, and it saved them $50 million a year. So that's a pretty, it's once again, kind of a simple example of forecasting, but big savings and huge increase in customer satisfaction, as we can all relate. Another example on transportation logistics, they pay different rates depending on where a ship lands and where it gets offloaded in the port. And so they were actually able to optimize what ships came into which ports, and that saved them about 7.5% on their inbound logistics costs. And that ends up being hundreds of millions of dollars in savings at the scale that they operate. So those are two examples of using machine learning in these. Then we'll talk a little bit later about some predictive maintenance examples.
Yeah. And I'm sure the ones that you were calling, there's many more, right? Like this type of technologies can actually solve many different problems along the way. Important being identify the problem first that you're trying to solve so that you can actually go after it with different technologies that come. I was talking at the beginning about what machine intelligence is, and then part of the reason why we thought it's so important to call it out is just because if we're seeing the maturity of or the types of use cases that are being used, if we go into the next page, what we do see is there's different interpretations of maturity, and that there's different focus of what companies are doing. Just from a reading perspective, on the left of this page, you actually see where are companies, the leaders in particular, investing the time and the use cases by the heat map. And on the right, you see where some of that bottom 50% of the companies are. And so what we see is the type of approaches that are used are quite different. In the right hand of the page, you see a lot of focus on visibility. How can you get the visibility through dashboards? How can you get some of that information to actually describe what your process is, where you have the failure points? And that actually requires a lot of interpretation and human interaction that goes there to actually solve what you have, which makes a slower impact at the end. Whereas what we see on leaders, we would of course love to see much more very deep blues all the way to the right. I think that there's an opportunity, and we will continue to see as those efforts go. I'm hoping a much more like bright coloring on the right for machine intelligence, but you do see a disproportionate amount of use cases that are more towards really automating the insights, not only automating and predicting, but also learning from them, and making automated decisions.
So, an example that I could give on, a more advanced technique is a company, Magna. They make four-wheel drive clutches. So it's the clutch that takes you from two-wheel drive to four-wheel drive. It's a very complicated mechanism. They collect data on hundreds of different variables, but that's still, even though they collected a lot of data, they were really not able to drive their rework and scrap down as much as they wanted. So there were lots of different parameters they could adjust. And certainly the lead operators were able over time to somewhat understand how to adjust these parameters, but it was always that best operator, and it didn't it didn't happen. Not every operator was able to intuit what should really happen. And so what ended up happening is you'd have some leaders who might adjust some of these parameters. They weren't really sure which ones. It got a little bit better. They wouldn't know which way to adjust the parameters or when. And then it would shift, could change on a shift by shift basis, or sometimes people just would not adjust parameters at all. So what they were able to do is, because they had collected a lot of data, they were able to, and this is process data, incoming product data, and then test data. They were able to use machine learning and determine which variables that mattered. Well, it turned out 41 variables actually mattered. So now you get an idea that it's a pretty complicated problem, but that there was one adjustment that mattered. So one adjustment could offset the impact of these 41 different input variables. And so they trained a machine learning model to make that adjustment. They now make that every 20 minutes automatically. And it's based on, the last X units that are produced in that time period. And they've actually had a 5X reduction in their rework and scrap process, or their rework and scrap. And it's been even more impactful because that particular line during the pandemic, they couldn't bring people in. And so what happened is, when they brought the line back up, a lot of those experts didn't return. But fortunately, the knowledge was now embedded in the machine learning algorithm. And so, while they're still employing the same number of people, that institutional knowledge was captured in the software, not in someone's mind. So big improvement for them. But that's an example of a process improvement there, kind of in the middle. You see a darker bar there. And clearly you see a lot of predictive maintenance and here as well. So
yeah, and by the way, that word predictive maintenance, I think it's been on a lot of our vocabularies for many years now. So I'm excited to start to see some of that moving into those colors as we go. I do want to make sure that we touch upon a couple of the other topics before we go into the playbook, but I do not want to understate the importance of the next point, which is about collaboration. There is one of the things that we see is the openness to collaborate and partner with others in this journey is one of the largest correlations that we saw as part of the results. And I have to say, as I was talking in the beginning, this is not exclusive to machine intelligence. This is something that we've continuously seen across every single area of digitization and automation, because internal capabilities or internal ways of thinking or the way that you've always done things won't get you there. And so there is significant partnerships that we see with academia, with startups, with the community, with the government, and that openness of sharing best practices and problem solving together and making sure there's an objective that everybody can contribute to makes a big difference, not only in the speed at which you achieve the results, but also in the results itself. You do see this effort was focused on North America, but if you take a look at some of the also leaders globally and some of the countries that are global leaders in terms of machine intelligence and automation, one of the things that we also can see correlation to is a higher propensity of openness and a higher propensity of working together with others, which has been a critical accelerator overall.
And I think, it's a little counterintuitive, but if you look at leaders, they partner with academia and startups, and you would think academia is on too long of a time scale for most companies and startups are too risky. But it turns out the reason that they do this is because they have significant domain knowledge. So they're not selling a specific platform or a generalized solution. they tend to be solving specific problems. And where the industry is in terms of machine learning, the physics of the system matters. A clear understanding of the data that's coming into the system matters. And so that's why you see this partnership in this area. I can give you a couple examples. A predictive maintenance startup called Augury has worked with Colgate-Palmolive, and they actually were able to prevent downtime. It saved 28 million tubes of toothpaste. That's a lot of toothpaste. They also worked with Frito-Lay, and they were able to really unlock capacity, about 4 months of capacity by scheduling downtime and maintenance. And they're able to actually, prevent the loss of 1 million pounds of pounds of finished products. So, finished chips. Once again, that's a lot of chips. And you look at a company like that, and really their specialization is motors, right? They understand, they listen to the vibration of the motors and the attached bearings. That's what they specialize in. And they're so good at that particular piece of it that they can be successful. So that's that kind of domain specific knowledge. Another example from academia, and it does happen to be one from that we've done here at MIT MIMO, is working with analog devices and developing a real-time quality control or process control system for them. They have a unique challenge in that they're, for the semiconductor industry, comparatively high mix and low volume. And so it makes it difficult for a machine learning algorithm in that environment because you need so many different algorithms. The other thing is typical of semiconductor, they have very, very low failure rates, so very high yield, but it's worth it to them to get just a little bit better. And so what we ended up having to do there in that case is actually learn from good data and then detect when it's not good. We couldn't say that it's bad. We could just say it's not good. We had to do that just on a few early runs, and then have that algorithm work. And so that really took, in that particular case, a couple of years of research to come up with it. So once again, the physics of the system, the domain specificity was why they came to academia to do that.
And one of the things that I had found particularly interesting, and you called a little bit of this, Bruce, is it's not about getting the package solution. I mean, you of course can get package solutions in certain things, but the important point about these partnerships is also the thinking. Like, I know of a couple of cases where companies certain companies had a problem and met with startups, and like what the product that the startup had or what the startup was trying to do was actually not fit to solve that problem. But the people in the startups, to your point, had domain knowledge and were actually able to create something that was very specific to the problem that the company was trying to solve, just because you have a lot of very bright minds with domain knowledge in every single one of the areas that we're talking about from a player's perspective. And so actually that gets you to the next level of thinking, which is different mixes of expertise and the diversity that comes in it. And so that diversity gets paired. It's not only about the external portion, but how can you actually enhance your internal capabilities for it, which is why talking about talent as a next point is so important, and talent that comes internally. And so what we've seen is
actually, can you go to the next slide, Pete?
Yes. And so what we've seen is there are two components of employee empowerment that we have seen. One is like really hiring talent that comes with that domain expertise. This is not the only solution. Like, it's not only not only a solution, but it's a portion of a solution. It's not the entire spectrum. Just going out there and hiring, it's not enough. You also need to make sure that you're training your employees in digitization and technologies, because the mix of both profiles is what makes a difference. The mix between the domain expertise as well as the intrinsic expertise of your operations and the way things work. Training it's something that I do not want to understate. very critical. And it's not only critical on the division leaders, engineers, managers, but executives, and the ability for executives to understand what the problem is and how technology will be enabled by it makes a very big difference in buying, makes a very big difference in engagement across the board, and ends up making a very big difference in the results that you make as leaders turn the keys of any organization.
And you can see the difference between line. So the training of line workers is one of the largest deltas here, that the bottom 50% simply doesn't do it, but leaders definitely do. So, those are the people on the front line that need to understand the importance of data. And I think, if you look at the top example, it's really complete teams. And a lot of times those teams will come in a center of excellence that have all these different kind of skills. So for example, McDonald's has one they call it the Hub. And the Hub, raises analytical standards across the organization. And McDonald's is broadly decentralized. It has many different company operations. And so the Hub generates the types of solutions that then get deployed across the markets. But the individual markets then need to take that software and identify their own features, train the models, test the models for their specific market. So they need to also train the employees in the market. So it's a two-step process, and that's worked out quite well for them.
Yes, completely agree. I'll say the last point before we go into the playbook itself, but I think the last point we wanted to make on the next page is actually data and the role that data plays, and not only data acquisition, but data execution along the way and the importance of it. Companies at the forefront actually put a lot of focus in ensuring that we acquire the right data, not only internally, but externally, that they share it across the board, that they have the right access to it, and making sure that the equipment and collection is right. One of the big fail points that I have personally seen when it comes to data is to think about acquiring and getting the data for the sake of getting the data. I think, Bruce, I'm sure you've heard this too, of like, oh, we'll just get the data and let the models tell us our answer. And it's like, well, you actually need to have a purpose for the data and for anything that you do on the models, because there's like a lot of data to go around that you can actually do. So having the right strategy around it and the infrastructure to support that makes a very big difference. The other thing, and Bruce, you called it out in your example before, is the point of the frontline access to that data and the frontline engagement on that data as well. At the end of the day, nobody will know your operations, even though as a leader, you may believe you know your operations better than anybody. Nobody will know your operations better than your frontline staff. Not only the issues with it, and also the potential solutions for it. So engaging the front line in understanding the data, and also jointly coming up with solutions to actually support that data through the training that we were talking about in the previous page. It's a differentiator for success and an enabler for the impact that we've seen.
Yeah, to amplify your point, there's essentially a saying that any data that you've never used is not going to be good data. What that means is if you haven't looked at it, if you haven't inspected it and trying to do something with it, it may have some errors in the measurements, some noise in the measurement. Your timestamps is something as simple as that. Your timestamps cannot be correlated, and in many cases, you cannot go back after the fact and fix that. So data that you think you will need, you need to look at. And so Magna would be an example of that. They did collect this physical data, the process data, the test data. They did look at it. They weren't using machine learning at the time, but they tried to use kind of basic analytics to see if they can determine how they made the system better, so that when they did actually bring in the data scientists, they had it's thousands of examples of data that then they could learn from. So they didn't, even though they didn't use machine learning, they used basic analytics, and they were able to make sure it was clean data. You know, another example is McDonald's. They work with their local teams to determine what data matters. What do we even need to collect, and why are we collecting it? They then develop conduits of how to get that in real time or near real time from the markets, and then bring that all into a common cloud-based solution so they can do the kinds of analytics that they need to do. So, you know, it's a really holistic data governance strategy. What data is important? How are we going to treat it? When are we going to expire it? Where are we going to store it? Once again, they treating data as an asset, and very similarly, what Wayfair has done is that they moved everything to the cloud almost immediately, and then they democratized access to the data across the company so that the people that could do feature engineering, they could develop new algorithms on the data without having to ask permission, or just removing the barriers to people to come in and look how different things would correlate across the organization. Because those barriers exist, it just takes too long to break them down. So once you get that data in one's place and democratize access, a lot of great things can start to happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, Bruce, I'll pass it on to you to talk about the playbook. But before we go that in the last minutes, I do want to say, I think a lot of, like, there may be many of you that looking into this say, well, some of these insights are, like, call it quote unquote obvious, right? Like, yes, we know that data is required. We know that things like this happen, but as we're looking at it, it's been very consistent that many companies are actually not doing it in a structured and consistent manner and put in efforts behind it. And so as you go through your journey, I really will encourage you to look at this obvious and look at the data that's like behind it, and think about each of the elements and how you're going to be able to make progress alongside all of them in conjunction and not in separation or in a silo. But Bruce, I'll pass it on to you to talk a little bit about the playbook.
Absolutely. So first, what I would ask is, if you have questions, please put them in chat. Hopefully you have been, because we'll have some time here at the end to go through those. But I wanted to start with explaining the original intent of the study, which was to help you understand the road, not the roadmap, but the map, right? What does the entire solution space look like? Because many people felt like, well, I just need to hire a data scientist and then my problems will be solved. And we've seen pretty high failure rates from projects like that because they didn't look at the entire picture of what's needed. So we wanted to create a map, the geography, what's it look like? And then second, it's not enough to have a map. You need to know where you are on that map. And so that was the second objective of the study. And that's really where the playbook starts to come in. It is both the map, and we've generated for all of you customized playbooks that show you where you are on that map. And the way the study has been designed is there's typically levels of performance. So it's fairly easy to see as we go through where you are relative to leaders and understand what that next best step is, and how you can progress from emerging, up through hopefully an executor and then on to a leader. So what we've done is, it's about a 30-page book. It looks at that high-level map and then quickly breaks down into each of the specific areas so that you can develop an action plan around the specific areas that matter most to you. So if you move to the next slide, we'll give an example of this, or this is the map itself. So Ingrid talked earlier about the different types of enablers, whether it's your strategy or where you focus, the type of governance we talked about, your level of deployment, who you partner with, the people you hire and train, how well you collect and manage your data, how much you spend, And then obviously the types of results and the levels of results you get, as you saw in the KPIs and the payback periods. And that allowed us then to create what leaders do well, planners, executors, and emerging. And the way that to read this is, the darkest blue is the top quartile, and then the lighter blue is that second quartile, and then light gray is the bottom half, as we've been talking about. And so you see, no surprise, leaders do well, they're top quartile in all of these categories, and emerging on the other end is not dark blue in any of them. And, we've given if you look on the right, you'll see a little bit more information on what's in each of those categories. And then as you walk through your playbook, you can see on a detailed line by line basis what fits in each of these categories. But just as at a high level, let's look at emerging, right? Many of you are going to be in that category. And which things are they light blue? So where have they moved from the bottom half to that second quartile? And it's really in partnering, data execution, and results. Why is that? It's pretty straightforward. They determined a problem that matters to them. They collected data on it, as you would expect. And rather than trying to home grow their solution, they went out and found a partner to help them solve that problem. And then lastly, they were able to deliver results. So a rapid payback period and a good improvement in KPI. And so that's for anyone who's just starting out. Pick a problem that matters, collect data on it, make sure it's good data, and then find a partner who can help you solve that problem. So that's an easy way to kind of think about how to engage with this. And what you see then, executors, they get a little bit more sophisticated as they move over. They're better at hiring the right people. So they do start to insource people. So you see people turning from the light gray to the light blue. They're not spending necessarily significantly more, but they are starting to get better results. The reason they're getting better results is they're focusing more on the right problems, the more solvable problems that we talked about earlier. So, and then you just keep marching across. And what I'm going to do now is switch to the next slide and show you how you can read your playbook. So you all will have a page like this. You'll see the exact same roadmap that I'd laid out on the last slide, but it has a new column. The column on the right is what your performance is. Now, this particular company is excellent in many, many ways. So they are actually leaders in many categories, but they're not getting the results that they should. So you see the arrow is pointing at these light gray boxes where even though they're leaders in one category, they're in the bottom 50% on the other. So there's three areas where they could improve, right? It's results, partnering, and governance. So what I'll do now is take a look into each of those areas and give you an idea for results, as an example, what might be able to be improved. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is results. So how well did they do? So they worked on factory output increase that we talked about earlier. They really didn't get comparatively good results. So, that's an area where you maybe need to set your bar higher, or maybe there's some other reason, but it is possible to do better in that particular project. So maybe you're not working with the right vendor. Maybe there's some other reason, but I think we wanted to have benchmarks for people so they could say, well, what should I expect to do, right? Maybe they think 5% to 10% is enough. So this helps to raise the bar and just give you some relative guidance as you're building your own business case and what kind of improvement you could expect. Same thing, labor productivity. The leaders are getting 14% on average improvement, and they're still down in the 5 to 10% range. So that gives you an idea of how to read that particular part of it. And there's other sections in the results page on payback period. You'll find that As I mentioned earlier, leaders have roughly half the payback period of everyone else. So there's quite a few pages that you can look through there. On the next slide, we can talk about, I think, did we skip one? Oh, no, I think, no, that's the next one. Sorry, thank you. So partnering. So in this particular example, they do partner with academia. They do partner with other people in the industry, but they're not partnering with startups. They're not partnering with their existing vendors. Perhaps there's some consultants out there that can help them. That's what leaders tend to be doing. Perhaps that would help this particular company get better performance. So, and then lastly, we talked a little bit about the governance process and how some pharmaceutical companies have done extremely well there. This particular company has gone to the trouble of defining a process, but they're not following it across the company, and they're not following it consistently. So that's an example of, okay, maybe we just need to get more rigorous about how we follow the process that we've designed. So,
and Bruce, if I add one thing, what you're saying on the process, I think that rigor needs to come with conviction. And so how do you, like, one of the things that, for example, in this case that we would encourage people is to think about, do you have the right change management in place with the right interventions that you need to have across the organization to make sure that the process is followed? Like, do you have the right messaging? Do people understand what they need to do in a different way, right? Do you have that rigor and establishment of the process? So the process itself is like defining the process, maybe one of the quote unquote easiest things. Following gets into trouble because following requires change management and conviction around it.
Thank you. Yes. And then we'll move to the last slide, and then we'll have some time for questions. So, I think that as we look for what's next, I think organizations do need to do a visioning exercise to determine what they want to be. So, for example, if they haven't collected data on their lines yet, then probably machine learning is not for them, right? So that needs to be part of what do you want to be in 3 or 4 years time, and kind of high level, what are you willing to invest? And then the next slide is, really to conduct an honest assessment of where you are. That's what this playbook helps you to do, to look at all the different areas, the types of skills you need to hire, the data you need to collect, how you need to think about storing and processing the data. So it gives you a real baseline of where we are, and that will help you inform what types of projects you should go after. And then we've already talked about the roadmap, and so sketching out a transition plan of how do I get from where I am to the next best step. So we don't anticipate anybody shooting straight for the leader. That's why there are 4 categories to go from emerging. You ideally like to be an executor, right? Spend less but get more results, and then add more and more capability, because as you add more internal capability, you can get proportionally better results. And then I think the last one is the most important, is find the use cases that matter to you. Get quick wins, pick simple ones, pick ones that have other people have had success on. Learn how as an organization to be successful using these technologies, and then continue to grow and expand your efforts. Don't try to solve a really hard problem all at once. Pick something that's relatively short in duration so you can get to a quick solution. And then that will really help start this flywheel, a success flywheel. So as far as next steps, we will be sending out the next study this fall, and it will be something you can share with your friends. We're certainly talking about companies that want to do the study in multiple divisions or multiple factories. That is absolutely okay. We call that fingerprinting, so that you can see across your entire company or set of factories which ones have what capabilities, and it can help you develop a resource plan, whether it's training or staffing or investment in data, across an entire corporation. So that'll be coming out fairly soon. So all of you certainly will get the emails. And I think we have just a few minutes for some questions.
Great. So Bruce and Ingrid, the first one here is about the types of companies that have been successful here. Did we see anything that was correlated between the size of the company and their success in the deployment of machine intelligence?
Certainly, there's more examples of larger companies being successful, but we also have smaller companies being successful as well. So just because you're bigger doesn't mean, just because you're smaller doesn't mean you cannot be successful. But we did have more examples in larger companies. But in this particular sample, we actually did have a lot more large companies fill it out. So in the next study, we want to control for that and answer that question directly of what is the difference of how does size relate to success and number of implementations. But when you pick a problem that matters, partner with someone with the data that you own, relatively inexpensively, you can get to a solution.
Yeah, I actually find that I have hypotheses as we control how that will look, because I do think that in a smaller company, one of the big advantages that you have is you actually have the ability to operate faster, because your change management is not as hard as trying to engage a multi-billion dollar company in all going into the same direction.
Right.
So I'm interested, I'm really interesting to see how will that play for us as we control that. But it's going to be definitely there's no one size fits all for this. Like, everybody can go into this journey.
And then the next one here is, what are some of the best ways to get smart on the topic?
So what I always suggest is a lot of people think they need to look at machine learning algorithms and try to study and learn that. And it is a very dense field. It's rapidly changing. To me, I always suggest looking for example use cases that are similar to what you do. So, we're collecting a set of use cases at MIT MIMO, so that people can read through and see what others have done and how they approached it and what success they got out of it. So the best way to get smart is just to look for people, typically in your industry, but not always, that are solving problems similar to yours and how they solve it. And I think that's a better use of time than trying to take a machine learning class online.
I was going to make the joke, Bruce, of join the webinar. But I do agree that's part of the partnering process as well, as you're continuously learning from others. And by the way, I mean, having been in this journey for a while, there's things that you need to know, and there's things that you definitely don't need to go that deep in order to be able to drive impact, right? It really depends also on the spectrum of where you're at and what your area of influence is and what's most important for you to know.
And then one more question here. I think this is in the context of some time has passed since the last survey, but what do you think might be different in terms of findings from this next survey and the research versus what we found so far?
Well, certainly we've always seen budget trends. So we do expect that to continue. I'm anticipating we'll see a spread across more use cases. So that's, I think, a big change that we think we'll see. I think we'll see more small companies. If you look at this last study, out of the 100 companies, 12 of them were under 200 employees. So I think we'll see more small companies come online. So those are the kinds of things that I'm into for a lot of the reasons that Ingrid said. So those are some of the changes that I'm expecting. And I think that one thing that I don't think will change is the leaders will continue to out-invest the rest of the industry, which will allow them to pull away even farther. So it increases the imperative of other people to, look at some of these simpler use cases and get started on the journey, because the leaders will pull away at a more rapid rate because they've got the learning of how to do this.
I 100% agree. I think that my one additional hypothesis to what you said, Bruce, is I think, and this is a guess, that we'll start to see a lot more cases around resilience and like a focus of using machine intelligence to build resilience in operations, especially with the changing environment. Whereas prior to this, a lot of focus and investment was on the efficiency side. That broader context of resilience and growth, I think it's going to be paramount for many companies in the future.
Great. So we'll wrap up here. There's one other question if the slides and recording will be shared. Both will be published, and we'll send out some follow-up notes there. And then a couple other items. All of you should have received a survey about your playbooks. We're going to follow the leaders here and ask for your feedback on what could be improved for the next time we publish them to help them be more useful to you. And then we'll have a survey here at the end as well, if you'd like to continue the conversation and ask any other questions of Ingrid, Bruce, or any of the research members of the team. Thanks again for joining us.
And just a quick point on the follow-up study is it asks which KPIs matter to you. Did we capture the ones that matter to you? Which use cases matter to you? When we did this study the first time, we essentially put down what we thought. So now we have a chance to get that feedback from you. So if you could take a few minutes, it's a pretty quick little study. So if you fill that out, that'd be great. Sorry, Pete.
No, good addition. Ingrid, Bruce, any closing comments?
I just want to say thank you all for joining. Thank you, Bruce and Mikey, for the partnership. This has been a really fantastic journey, and we're excited about the insights to come.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you all for joining and for participating.
Fantastic. Thank you.